Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Ocel, VP of Innovation at This.Labs, here for another episode of the Leadership Exchange. Today, I'm here with a co-host, Elliott Fouts, CTO at This.Labs. Elliott, how are you doing?
Doing well. Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody.
Very excited to be talking about AI transformation and innovation, and we have an amazing person here to talk about it with. That's Dr. Dorren Schmitt, the VP of IT Strategy and Innovation at Allen Media Group. Dorren, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we got a chance to meet at an event recently, and I have been anxiously awaiting to have this conversation. I think it's going to be really valuable to a lot of people who are either in the midst of their own AI transformation, planning for it, or perhaps regretting going into it without a clear plan. In order to get us started, I thought it'd be really good if you could help people understand, what your journey was with your organization and kind of how we arrived at this moment for you in your company's journey. So I guess at a high level, can you kind of give us a sense of what that looked like and the role that you played in it?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. So, we started our journey back at the very end of 2023. So we saw where this could, change a lot of the things that we did. Remember, we're a media company. The Weather Channel is one of our brands underneath us. And of course, we've been doing ML for as long as you can think with all the weather data. But we saw opportunities for how to change all of our workflows to be from just deterministic to having at least some non-deterministic aspects, and thought that this would be one of those transformation times for our business and potentially all businesses, and it was that pivotal point of that aha moment in late 23 and 24.
Wonderful. Yeah, early too. I mean, you guys have been at this for a hot minute. I mean, I think a lot of people that are listening to this maybe got really excited. I think what we've seen in the adoption curve is people that got excited at the beginning of this year with all the Claude code and the OpenClaw and all of that excitement and the vibe coding piece that really caught on this year. It's exciting to hear that you guys have been at this now for a couple of years and doing it back when the technologies were even a little bit less mature than they are now.
That's absolutely true. But I think what got us here was that we were already using ML. We were already using aspects of AI. So we were familiar with the constructs, particularly when it came to weather data. And this is just extrapolating it. But I will say that the maturity of generative AI has been, like no other technology we've had, not only in my lifetime, but I think in the history of the world, at the speed at which it changes.
I want to focus on the very beginning of this journey, though, because I think one of the things that we've seen working with a lot of companies on AI transformation journeys is this idea that you deal with these parallel emotions of like extreme excitement. Everybody wants to play with the shiny new thing. Everybody wants to see all the cool benefits that they're reading about in the news. But at the same time, there's a lot of trepidation, a lot of uncertainty, sometimes might be even fear or a lot of risk aversion. And so I was wondering, like, for you, how you got over, I guess, some of those detracting emotions in order to like really be able to start leveraging that excitement.
And that comes down to our employees and making sure that they feel comfortable. One of the things is AI is not a problem with the technology. Now, I'm going to put hallucinations and some maturity aside, because we have growing pains. Don't get me wrong, but most of the issues are people and process, and you need to start with your people, and you need to start with making sure that they know that you're not trying to replace them. That you're trying to make them more efficient, and you do that through education. And I'm not talking about giving someone an hour class on this is how you prompt and here's your tools and go at it, but really dive deep with employees and sit down with teams and provide them with very tangible ways on how to implement AI for their job function. Not for just anybody, but for their job function. So sitting down with HR and talk to them about how they could use videos to improve new hire engagement or employee engagement. How can they use a document notebook, to be able to analyze, let's say you just had an M&A, and analyze the different employee handbooks and where are they different and how do we merge these companies together and what are those cultures. Those are the harder things to do, but those are the things that will get your employees from being fearful, wanting to use it in their personal life, but not wanting to use it in the corporate life, and actually, being able to use it in their corporate life and use it responsibly, ethically, and effectively.
Yeah, you got to get people into that innovation mindset and out of that compliance mindset, right? I think we've seen a lot of places where this is true. You hear about organizations that think that they're kind of being cool and they put like the token leaderboard type of idea. And what you hear from some of the staff at those places is they're not excited to be on that leaderboard. They feel somewhat pressured and compelled to show up there. And I think that's not the space that you want them to be in when they're coming up with realistic use cases for how this will make their jobs easier, when all they're doing is like, what is the boss looking and what do I need to do to get them not looking at me negatively?
Those numbers are really false numbers because they should be going up and down. Today's leader, 5 days from now, they're doing something else and maybe they don't need to use AI. Everybody shouldn't be up at that top leaderboard all the time. But what is really important is to find those people who are your champions, those people who want to innovate, and they're the people who can help amplify, whatever your AI team is doing. They're the people, they're boots on the ground, actually using it besides your team. But they're the people who can actually be your champions, who can say, hey, look, I did this, I tried this. And I do that all the time with my AI office hours that I have on a monthly basis, where our employees, anybody can share whatever they want, and I'll tap certain people occasionally on the shoulder saying, hey, I know you've been doing this, and I think a whole bunch of other people could really benefit from it. Can you explain what you did during my office hours?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, study groups. We talk about that a lot here too, that creating spaces for people to share what they've learned and to push each other to innovate beyond that is very important. But I want to follow up on this idea of experts, because one of the things that we've seen is that it's great to have champions for AI in organizations, but the larger the organization is and the more of these champions you have, their opinions on AI and how it should best be used in the org don't necessarily align with each other. So this is maybe a change management generalized question more than an AI specific one, but like, what have you done to kind of, to get people excited to innovate, but yet still bring them together so the whole team is kind of pulling in one direction, or at least progressing in one direction?
So, one of the things, and I see this out a lot, where everyone talks about, oh, you need to use Claude for this, and Anthropic for that, and Gemini for this. And very honestly, we've tackled this, transformation problem before. And although it's wonderful to have all these point solutions and do best of breed, there is virtually no company on this planet, for I don't care what technology it is, to have best in breed of everything. So it takes level setting everyone really upfront, and that starts with your ELT. And those were the first people that I trained, was actually our leadership, telling them, what AI is, what AI isn't, how they could use it, for their jobs, effectively. Because if they're not using it, and they aren't, at least to a certain level, some of our champions, no one else below them will be. But it's also about, framing, saying, look, we don't have unlimited funds. This is our platform. This is what we've chosen. Now, come to us if you have some very specific use cases for this innovative project, which is where our whole innovation committee comes in, to be able to help vet those things and also help drive them. with funding, with resources, and with tying it to the business and being able to get that ROI out of it.
It's funny because a lot of orgs really focus on engineering when it comes to AI. We talked to a bunch, and they're just so like, we got to get our coders to do this, and it's been a lot of work to get people to see even broader across the software development lifecycle, to see to test and delivery, but also to product and piece like that. But what I love about this story is how it seems like it was just sort of innately obvious to you that this was a whole organization challenge. And I love the stories that you tell about how you sat down with finance, and you sat down, like you said, with the executive leadership team, and you weren't trying to get the executive leadership team, or at least I don't know, to just be, oh, hey, why don't you sling some PRs and some code and see if that, just get a sense of what your engineers are going to be going through. But you were trying to actually solve the real problems that they have. Again, it maybe seems obvious, but it's not obvious to a lot of orgs. So can you speak to that, about how, you decided pretty early on that this was going to be a full company embrace of AI and not just an engineering thing?
So, it was obvious from the technology that this has been only the second technology that I can really think of that has impacted every employee and was going to impact every employee. And the last time this happened, it was computers and the internet. And personally, I think we failed with that. We basically gave people computers and told them, here's the internet, go figure it out yourself. And I saw how that failed back in the 90s and early 2000s. And I come from an education background. So teaching and learning and expanding your knowledge is natural and innate to me. And I think part of that played into this, that we needed to transform the whole company, not just the engineering teams. And actually, our engineering teams are some of the teams that push back the most on using AI. I think I have much more resonance coming from our various business units and even our creatives. And our creatives are loving using some of those specific tools that they already have in place, that they've been using, that those tools have added AI to it. And we're not only talking about the whole collaboration suite platform in terms of using AI, but across all the platforms, whether it is our creative suite, whether it's our ERP system, whether it's our CRM system, where do we have AI built into those, and how can we leverage those for that part of the workforce to make them more effective and efficient?
That is such an interesting thing. I think that's the thing that surprises some people, I guess, if they haven't started this journey, is that engineers are of many minds on the technology, and it can be some are extremely excited and some are extremely resistant. And I think what's surprised people is the degree to which some of the AI transformation piece has been excitement-wise driven top down. I don't know if this is universal everywhere, though, because some people do complain that they're having trouble getting some senior leadership to authorize certain tools or certain expense levels and things of that nature. So I don't know, do you feel that that's at least in your experience, has it been the case that you feel like the energy in the embrace of it is stronger from the top down, or was that just a product of what you were trying to do, or do you think that it's really just coming from all directions?
It's really coming from all directions, and particularly when it comes to such a transformation like this, I like it coming from both directions. There has to be some top-down guidance. There needs to be some direction. There needs to be some focus. How are we, wanting to leverage this? Are we leveraging it to improve internal processes first? Let's get some prioritization. That's where the innovation committee comes in. But also, there are so many great ideas coming from the bottom of, those are the people that are feeling lots of the pain points those are the people that will really have some of the most transformative things for the company and have great ideas on how to make our products better if we just listen to them.
Mm-hmm. One of the things stories that we're hearing a lot of recently is stories of companies that had budgets, they projections for the year. This is how much we're going to spend on subscriptions. This is how much we're going to spend on tokens. And the stories are going around that they've blown through their annual budget in 3 months and it's accelerating. It's not peaking. And I think people that are just on this journey or just approaching it are wondering what they should be budgeting for, and they're nervous. And I mean, I'm cognizant of the fact that when any company starts a transformation or a journey with AI, there's at least an investment at the beginning where you're going to be inefficient in your usage of it because you're feeling it out, you're learning, you're experimenting. Like optimization comes later. And I thought you had a really good point on LinkedIn recently about this. Like, how should companies be budgeting for, thinking of, and approaching the costs associated with undergoing this transformation?
So that's a wonderful question, because I don't think we should be budgeting the same way that we've budgeted for other transformations. And I kind of liken this to, a venture capitalist. Is, AI projects, if you're doing it right, are not one and done projects. So there's going to be a life after it and a life of funding. You're hoping that there is a product coming out of this, that there is the residual costs that are going to come with it. So if you think about, having a bucket of money, a lot of companies today are still trying to fund it through operations, so OpEx. The problem with OpEx is your OpEx budget is the most volatile budget of all of them. At best, it's an annualized budget, but that can also waver through the year. There are a lot of companies that their OpEx budgets are only quarterly budgets, and then they realign. We get an annual budget, but then we'll do a 6+6 and 7+5 and readjust it. But if you start providing a dedicated, safe bucket of money, and you put that innovation committee in place, then what happens, if you look at it from a venture capitalist standpoint, is as you're going through a product, or project or POC for AI, you're given a certain amount of money until you reach a certain benchmark. And that's what venture capitalist does, is say, well, I'm going to give you $1 million to start off with. I want you to do X, Y, or Z. Once you do X, Y, or Z, let's look at what these outcomes are. How far did you get? Okay, now you've achieved that. Okay, I'll give you some more money for it. And you're actually, capitalists talk about it as trenches, but you have those trenches that you use to then be able to figure out what that ROI is. But you do need a dedicated budget. You need something that's safe, and you need to think more than a year out, because some of these projects may actually, because of experimentation, take more than a year. And a venture capitalist isn't looking for that quick win. They're looking for that long-term revenue stream. They're looking for that long-term investment that will pay off. And once you start rethinking in that mindset, I think funding and aligning funding with your projects becomes at least an easier conversation.
I mean, I love that framing, and I want to sit in that a little bit longer, because I want to know, what are those metrics that an org should be looking at as this sort of venture capital endeavor is going through, to know whether it's working, whether it's getting to that conclusion, or whether they need to do a pivot. I'm curious, to what extent, what are you all measuring as far as how you know that your usage is effective and is actually driving innovation and change and results at the org? But also, if you were going to start this process over again at a new organization, are there different metrics that people should be looking at? Because I think a lot of people are either they're reading the excitement that people have with AI and seeing, oh, that's a good sign, that's a good signal. But then they get their bill from Anthropic, and that's a negative signal. And I think a lot of people are just really confused how to know whether they're on the right path or they need to make a pivot. So I'm kind of curious what guidance you would give to help people stay moored a little bit.
So the benchmarks and the metrics, the KPIs are not something that I like to put set in stone for every single project. You need X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be bound to fail there. The important thing, and I'm going to go back to that innovation committee, and I'm going to go back to the importance of it. And let me just, if you don't mind, I want to speak just a little bit about the innovation committee. Mm-hmm. So the committee that we stood up, that I think is that sweet spot, is your SVPs and your VPs. Now, if you're a smaller organization, that VP or SVP of IT might be a director. So, take that kind of with a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. Take that as a continuum. But if you're above that level, you don't know about your people resources. If you're below that level, you aren't a decision maker. You can't make a decision and make it stick. And your innovation committee has to have the power to say yes or no, and no is really important. That power to say no. The yeses tend to be a lot easier to come by. You don't have to ask permission. My decision of go, no go is it. And if I say no, I say no. But those are the people that usually have the budgets, so they know the P&L, they know how the company's doing. They are the people that are far enough down the chain to understand the people resources and those constraints for doing projects. And most importantly, they are the people who have, to a large extent, the day-to-day responsibility of a company's mission and their 3-year strategy. They're the people who are really tasked with executing those things. And where we've been very successful is on tying our projects to our mission or our strategy. And from there, your metrics usually fall out pretty simple. If you're, the CFO or you're the controller, what are important things for me? Okay, well, it is, getting paid faster. It's paying our bills more efficiently. It's closing our books faster. And that's some of the things that we did with AI to help the finance department. Is help them close their books faster. We help them with, getting paid more efficiently, from our bills, so that we have a better income flow. And we also know and how to pay our bills and how to match those things up. Matching like POs to invoices, really critical to do that. When you look at, at the Weather Channel, some of our on-air products, we were able to take, warnings that are very highly structured and be able to then get them out, particularly overnight when we don't have all the resources that we do during the day. Get them out up to 5 minutes faster than we did before. That's an intangible. There's no money necessarily attached to it, but there's brand reputation and our mission, which is to protect and save lives, that come into play there. So sometimes money isn't kind of like the end all be all. It is what's driving our brand to continue being the most trusted brand.
Here's what's fascinating about that to me, is that when I've thought about AI transformation at some organizations, especially engineering orgs, right? The idea is that you might be momentarily less efficient, because you've learned how to build something one way and you're being reskilled quite dramatically to build it another way. In engineering, that's a very large difference. And so there's a sense that like, hey, some of our metrics might spike in one direction, or they might spike in the opposite direction. Costs might go up and then go back down. It might be hard to know where you are while you're in the woods. But once you emerge from it, the thought is that, you know, if you stay the course, you're going to come out retrained, reschooled, and way more efficient. What I've heard from you and what it sounds like is that like focusing on those immediate wins and then intermediate wins and later wins is like so key to driving this, because some of the things that you were saying weren't necessarily massive risk. They were just immediate, like this is now something we could do that we couldn't, or this is now happening way faster. Like it was immediately making differences on the bottom line. What are your thoughts on, I guess, an organization and the mix of their portfolio on like long plays and short plays as they're doing this adoption? Because I could see some orgs maybe banking on a long-term, too many long-term plays and just losing heart in the middle. And I guess that's one of the things I'm worried about. It's like how a organization stays committed, how that innovation group understands that they're actually getting some results, even if some of them might not come online for 6 months or 9 months or longer.
And you know, that's part of the problem is I think a lot of companies are trying to eat the elephant.
Yeah.
And, you know, although that is great and that's very ambitious to do, you need to take those smaller steps. And the first steps that we took were steps for improving internal workflows. And again, I talked about this being, you know, a people and a process problem. And I also see a lot of companies taking human faulty processes and trying to just plug AI into it. And that's also wrought with lots of problems. You know, you need to actually look at the workflow. And once you start putting technology in a workflow, you need to work on, you know, optimizing that workflow for the technology. Because that workflow that was a human workflow was optimized for a human, even as faulty as it was optimized for a human, which is very different than optimizing it for any technology, least of which AI.
Yeah, it has been very humbling. I think there was two thoughts early in the AI journey, was that AI was going to be this thing that took just everybody, we call it like additively, that it just took everybody from wherever they were and just moved you up several tiers. And then what we've come to realize, and I'm curious if you think the same way, what we've observed is that it seems to be sort of like a multiplicative thing. It makes great organizations and great processes and people trained in those processes incredibly more efficient and like get incredibly better results. And we've seen that like some of those process inefficiencies or, you know, those weird things in organizations that you're like, we'll fix it someday, but humans have been papering over it for a long time with a lot of personal effort. AI has been sometimes disastrous at those orgs because they just run headlong into a bunch of process and technical and cultural debt that they just have not addressed. And I just feel like people are really paying that cost now if you've been delaying some of those modernizations and maturities. Is that what you've observed as well?
That is absolutely true. What I also see is, you know, I agree. It's not an exponential growth. It is multiplicative. It is, you know, and it might be 5 years from now, you know, that exponential growth. But what I'm seeing is that, you know, we still need the human in the loop. You know, we still need some oversights. But what I explained to my president is that every workflow, every automation that we do this year, next year, we'll need a human in the loop. 2 years from now, that workflow probably won't need a human in the loop because we as an organization will mature. Generative AI will mature. And that process will probably mature some more because we might launch something, but again, it's not one and done. You're going to have to go back and revisit. You're going to have to make some adjustments. Things are going to change in AI that might force you to make those adjustments. But I've also told him that 2 years from now, there will still be processes that we're going to be creating, new ones that will need that human in the loop. And it will be this constant little leapfrog that we do, where we have processes, we've automated them, AI is doing it, we need a human in the loop. We've now matured enough to where now we don't need a human, or we almost never need a human. But there's going to be new things that we build that will need that human in the loop. And then those will mature and we'll be on this constant, maturing all of these products, these processes, these flows, where they start out with human in the loop, but they end up where they are largely or totally automated.
I remember sitting down and talking to a CEO once of a company that worked in like manufacturing. And I found that I've been able to glean a lot of insights into the best ways to interact with AI, especially AI transformation, by thinking about how automation occurred in factories. And it's like sometimes a lot of the same things. Some of us are bumbling forward thinking that we can just set up a fully automated manufacturing company and just start shipping products to people and just throw our hands up and say, that's good. It's like, no, there are not only stages of maturity in your automation, but like you said, if you bring a new line on, up to speed, there are a whole set of validations, verifications, and things that you need to do to make sure that that thing is ready to before it can operate even partially in automated fashion, let alone fully automated. And I think AI does a really good job of convincing us that it's way more capable than it can be when we just give it full charge of these processes. And yeah, I worry for some of the companies that are being a little too forward thinking or a little too adventurous when it comes to bringing these on. And in the engineering sense, we see it a fair bit with stories of production databases getting deleted and things of that nature happening, every week. Because,
or like everybody's email being deleted.
Yeah, like even if it works 99% of the time in an enterprise, that 1% is going to happen a lot, and there's no cap on how devastating it can be, because if you give it the keys to everything, it can do everything. So,
and you bring up a really good point. Is we are giving AI a lot of keys. And that is one thing, when you start looking at, your cybersecurity risks, is, being able to make sure that all of your processes aren't using the same key, that, you have separate service accounts. And I read an article that said for every one employee by the end of, I think it was 27, for every single employee that you have, you're going to have at least 34 agents. So think about that. Each of those agents should be their own identity. And if you start thinking about, your employees and your identity, and let's just think of a company of 100 people. Okay, that means you don't have 100 employees. You have now 3,400, 3,500 employees that you're now having to deal with, that your security team, your IT team are having to manage. And how are you protecting those? Because the next greatest risk for a company will be those identities that are automated identities that have way more privileges than that handful of technicians that you have that have all the keys to your kingdom. Now you have all of these other agents that have lots of keys to the kingdoms. And those are now going to become your greatest risk.
Yeah. I mean, I think all companies want security to be at the forefront of their minds. But listen, I've seen companies, even surprisingly large companies, where the IT administrator has his admin password, post-it noted to his monitor. And like those things happen, and we rely a lot often on humans to paper over gaps in our processes. AI will not respect that papering. Like it will do its best, but as you said, that just the nature of generative AI is that it is probabilistic. And whether it's 1 in 100, 1 in a million, 1 in a trillion, give it enough times at bat, eventually it's going to do something that you didn't expect. And if you've given it permissions, as I said before, humans have a sense of like touching the stove. We kind of back off. We're like, ooh, that seems very dangerous. I don't, and so there's a little bit of a mitigation effect in the way that we act based on what we know would happen to us if really bad things happen. And AI just does not have that. So it will happily march from the most mundane errors to the most catastrophic errors with the same happiness. It is not withdrawn, or it thinks about the significance of that. And so I think that's what catches people by surprise sometimes. They just assume the AI would know something would be very damaging if it did it wrong, and it treats that in the same way that it would treat a typo. Like, both of them are just undesired outcomes, and it doesn't really value weight them differently. And a lot of orgs just don't think about that. So I like what you're saying, that security really needs to be up front and center on this journey as well, because this is not something you want to retrofit after the fact. Certainly not after the first incident.
That you need to weave throughout the entirety of your program. And one of the key places, I keep on going back to this, but one of the key places is education and your innovation committee. Because education with AI is very much like how we, the importance we put on education for phishing and cybersecurity, and it should be at least at that same level of importance in your organization. And then the innovation committee, again, who we have sitting on the board is our CISO, our head of IT, our controller, HR, legal. We have our creatives, we have sales, we have marketing. I'm a good mathematician. Our committee is 13 people, nice prime number, not divisible. Everybody has a primary, and every position has a primary and a secondary. And again, the key is everybody's at the table. Everyone's hearing what projects we're working on. Everybody's hearing where we are with those projects. And so legal is at the table, cyber's at the table, HR's at the table. So all those business units that sometimes get lagged behind, not knowing things, are at the table, and that makes it really important that problems are dealt with up front and when they arise, and not, oh wait, we need to bring this person in. But the other thing is, by having sales and marketing in those meetings too, as we're building products that might influence our customers, now they're on the upfront of saying, okay, how do we monetize this? How do we bring this to making sure our customers or our vendors know about this and really tout this?
Yeah.
And they're not on the back end either.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to pivot here because we're getting near to the end of our time. And at the time that people are listening to this, you have a book coming out, and it will have just been released by the time people are hearing about this. I believe it's called the AI Production Playbook. And I was wondering if you could let people know, like, what they can expect to find in that book and maybe who you wrote it for.
So the book, we've actually been talking about the book the whole time. It's 5 pillars. We've talked about all but one of them, which is data, which is very important, obviously foundational. I talk about in the book, data not being part of a project, but being a product. If you think about it, there's been a few comments that data is the new gold. Well, data's been gold since the internet. And since Amazon, which is where my book, will be the easiest to get to, started to leverage that back in the 1990s. With every time they, recommended, well, people who bought, product X also bought product Y. Well, that was machine learning, very deterministic, because we didn't have generative AI back in the 1990s. But it was still that beginning foundation of it. I wrote this book for all the SMBs out there. The big boys have large teams. There's not a large team here at Allen Media Group. It's for the C-suite, and I say C-suite very liberally because, again, when you talk at SMB, that CIO might be the director of IT, and that CISO might also be the director of IT for all that's worth at some companies. But it's trying to give that level playing field to everyone to be successful in the AI paradox of why are 80% of our POCs failing, and it's because we need to think about this a little bit differently. And our whole conversation today has really been, the 5 pillars that I think has made us successful in launching our POCs.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to pick it up. By the time you're listening to this, I've already picked it up, but right now I can't wait to pick it up. And I guess as we wrap up, other than checking out the book, any other things or places that you want to point people to where they can either connect with you or see you next?
So certainly go out to my LinkedIn site. My name is unique enough. If you put in my first name on LinkedIn, I will be at the top of your list.
There you go. Natural SEO. I love it.
Yes. My parents did a great job of that for me. But listen to some of the things I continually post about AI. I want to share my knowledge. I want to make sure that everyone is successful on this AI journey. AI is here to stay. It's not going away. Those companies back in the 90s that thought the internet was a passing fad no longer exist. 10 years from now, if you are thinking AI is a passing fad, I'm sorry. I would actually potentially put money, even as a mathematician, on the fact that you probably won't be here. So everyone needs to get in this game, and we need to do it well, and we need to do it right. And the companies who are small have less ability to make mistakes. And I'm hoping this book helps alleviate some of those mistakes and get you down the road much further, much faster, without some of the pain.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. That's going to be it for us today. Thanks so much to Dorren for being our guest. And thanks to all of you for listening. Hope to see you all next time. As we close out, we would just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that This. Is dedicated to guiding companies through their modernization and AI transformation journeys. This.Labs is a tech consultancy that specializes in amplifying your technical capabilities, whether it's expanding your dev team with seasoned professionals or streamlining your project's journey from ideation to deployment. We work with clients like Google, Microsoft, PayPal, and more. Check us out at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. Thanks, everybody. See you all next time.